I think for you, it's true for you, and I think it's true for probably a lot of people. You need to be a lot bigger than you are now. I don't think where you're at now is.
Oh yeah.
What I mean by that is, that could have come out wrong. I didn't.
You need to get fucking bigger, bud.
I didn't mean it like that. What I meant was, I think your body is capable of holding a lot more muscle.
Bulking ultimately leads to a leaner physique. My main goal is to build muscle, which will ultimately allow me to eat more and stay leaner in the future.
You should be more muscular, as in more muscle, less fat, larger metabolism, and over time, that is how it's done. Now, I think if people are just constantly chasing leanness and then rushing the bulk back up because it's an unnatural level of smallness for them, they're not supposed to be that small, it's going to cause problems. They're always going to be either dieting or just super rebounding really fast. That you can't build muscle like that. To build muscle, you need a constant small surplus for a long amount of time.
What's it like living in the UK?
I like it. It's cold. It's cold. The weather's not great. Yeah, no, it's all right, man. People are nice. It's pretty chill. Yeah, it's pretty chill.
Yeah, when you say cold, like what are we talking here? Because you guys do Celsius there, correct?
Yeah, well, it was, to be honest, it was better this year. We had 2 days this year, where it was so cold it was like painful. You know, when your bones just hurt because it's so cold, like it was that. But last year it was a lot more, and it seems to be getting warmer. So I guess that's okay. Yeah, no, I mean, people are nice. Like, people are proper, just chilled out, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. It's a broad question. Yeah, at home, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I've lived all over England, so now I'm kind of back to where I grew up, which people are nicer, people are friendlier. Yeah, it's cool. We've got good tea.
Yeah, the stereotype is real.
Stereotype.
Yeah, well, I just ask when you say how cold it is, because here in Canada, like, it can get to like -40 Celsius.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I think the big thing is we're not really prepared for any kind of extreme weather. That I don't think it's actually that cold, and it never really gets actually that hot. It's just that all the houses here, they're just not equipped for extreme heat, so there's no fans and stuff, and so yeah, we get that. That's the problem.
Yeah, fair enough, man. And have you lived there your whole life?
No, so I left home pretty soon to go to university, and I went to university in Liverpool. Then did a postgrad in Brighton, which was right down south on the beach, down from London. Then I went away and lived in Asia for like 1.5 years.
Oh wow!
I was in South Korea for 1 year, and then after that I traveled around Asia for 6 months, just backpacked around like a proper hippie. It was great. That was around Japan, South Korea, and China, which is cool, which is really fun. Came back, lived a few places around England again, and then eventually, about 10 years ago, I moved back to my hometown, which I like, you know. So yeah, so been around a fair bit.
Cool, man. Yeah, I've been thinking about doing some traveling as well. I haven't. I'm actually leaving the country for the first time, pretty much. Like, I went to the States, just dipped in and dipped out, but I'm going to be going to the Dominican Republic, and I've never really used my passport for anything, so I'm pretty excited.
Nice, dude. That'd be awesome. Very cool. Yeah. You got any plans to do any traveling, like elsewhere, like living abroad, or?
Yeah, like I want to eventually I would like to kind of like travel to like people I met, like people like you. I can go to places and hit up the gyms and check stuff out. Yeah. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be cool. I always thought one of the best ways to get to know a country and to know the people is to just live there for a while and just get engrossed in the culture. So when I was living in South Korea, I was completely engrossed in the culture. It was awesome. You really get to grips with who the people are, and there's a lot of similarities between different people in different countries. I mean, you look at the news and everything's really overblown, like the differences are massive, but the reality is people are just cool, you know. People are just do what they want to do. They want to work, they want to have a good life for themselves, their families, and in general, most people I run across are good people, which is nice. It makes the whole world seem a lot more friendly. And sometimes it can seem a bit scary when you're staring down at the news and stuff like that. So
Yeah, absolutely. I try to avoid watching the news for the most part.
Yeah.
That shit'll grind you down a little bit.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
So I did write down just a few things, just because I feel like with training, sometimes I like to plan a few topics that we can dive into. So one thing that I've been kind of thinking about is, you know, how I've been focusing on the one top set and then doing the back off set. One thing I've been thinking about is sometimes I go so hard on a top set that my back off sets suffer in progression. So say the first set is like, I'm going for 10 reps or whatever. And that's like all out grinder rep at the end. Like my form's still solid, but it's like my real slow last rep, like boom, I get my 10th rep or whatever. And I hit that progression marker, but then I do the back off sets and maybe I can't even do the same amount of reps that I did the week prior on the back off sets. So this is something I've been thinking about. Is that still a form of progression? If you're that top set is still getting it? I guess the question is like, if you're not getting necessarily the same volume, but that top set is more, you're getting more volume on that top set, is that still progression?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a few angles I can attack that from. So I think, firstly, I think the bottom line is still progression. So performance increases are still the #1 indicator you're gaining muscle, because if you get a couple of more reps on that top set, odds are your muscles have grown to the point where they're capable of giving that. So it's a pretty clear indicator you're doing well. Most of the time, and you'll know from our coaching, I look at the top set a lot more than I look at other sets. Other sets are probably more an indicator of muscle endurance, how full you are, and all that kind of stuff, not necessarily muscle growth per se. So yeah, there's a couple of ways that we can approach that. I think firstly, if we look at the role of, if we carry on talking about performance. So performance is the big one. Now, in terms of the top set followed by either one back off or multiple back offs, it's quite a nice system because mentally it's a little bit easier to just smash that one set and then back off a little bit and just kind of get the volume in. I think sometimes if you're trying to improve all 3, 4, 5 sets, it can get quite taxing. So generally I kind of default to just looking at the top set and saying, you know, even if we're doing sets across, so let's say you got 100 kilo on the bar and you're just doing sets of like 5 to 15. First set you get 14, great, it's more than last time, cool. After that, let's say you get 10 and then 8 and then 5 as you get more tired. I'm still only really looking at the first set, and the rest is just hammering home the message, getting the volume in. So it's still, that's how I would judge a progression, and I think that's okay. I think the first set is a lot more indicative of if you've grown or not. Definitely. Subsequent sets, like you've pointed out, it might be an indicator of how tired you are from the first set, or just how ready you are for the session. You know, maybe you've not slept as well. Maybe you're not as full. You're not as glycogenated. You know what it's like if you've had a week of dieting. Your volume, your ability to do volume goes down. So, yeah, I mean, I'm generally looking at the first set, and you could expand that out to the whole workout. I mean, if I've got you doing a bench press first exercise, a dumbbell bench second exercise, and a cable fly third exercise, if you're on a dieting phase and you don't necessarily see progress in the cable fly or second or third exercises, it's not always a bad thing if you see performance increase in the first exercise. So those muscles are growing. So I think you've got to give yourself a bit of leeway, and I think it's important to do that. Otherwise, you risk getting to the point where you're just forcing out those extra reps by cheating on your form because you're like, oh goddamn, coach is going to think I suck. I've got to get these extra reps, right? So just be realistic about where you can see performance increases. I think first exercise, first main set, you've got to get that performance increase if it's there. But yeah, so then the other side is, what if you go too hard and you impact the rest of it?
Yeah.
I think this is where you've got to sort of take the workout as a whole rather than just the power of an individual set. I think there's a threshold where, let's say this is decent performance, right? Above that, cool, all good. Below that, not so great. I think we need to get to a decent level of threshold. This is why I'm much more of a fan of saying, okay, we might not want to go either all the way to failure or past failure if it's going to destroy you. Like a guy like Jeffrey Veritas Schofield goes to failure, goes beyond failure, still managed to maintain a great level of performance. Now, that's cool. If I go to failure and beyond on the first exercise, I'm done. You know, I'm going home. Like I just, it's the way you're built. If you have the ability to really put yourself into a set and just really destroy yourself, you're not going to have much left if you do that on the first exercise of the day. And that's why the first exercise of the day, I generally won't take it to failure or beyond at all, because I'll just be destroyed for the rest of it, because I have the ability to really tap into something really extreme. And if I go there, first exercise of the day, and I've got another 15 work sets to do, I've just ruined my workout. I've shot myself in the foot. So yeah. I think I've got to just, and I think just because you can go to failure and beyond for every set doesn't mean you're necessarily doing a better job as somebody who can't. It's just a case of how hard can you push. It's not always a case of, okay, the guy who's working to failure more often is working harder. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they're just not capable of working that hard. Like we know with most females, they have an ability to do a lot more volume and train a lot more things to failure. Now, doesn't necessarily mean they're training harder, but what it does mean is potentially their bodies aren't able to push quite as hard. So that's why they can go to failure more often, because their failure isn't quite the same as somebody else's. Like a really big, naturally strong androgenic guy, his failure is going to be a lot deeper. It's going to cause much more damage. So this is why I don't get hung up in those conversations. I made a video recently about the value of training to failure. I don't mind. I don't care. And I also don't think it's not that important. Performance increases are the most important thing. So I think, to answer your question, I think you've got to look at the entire workout as a whole, right? I'm after 15, 20, 25 decent sets. I'm not just after one, and we need to make sure everything's moving. So everything needs to be of a decent quality. It's not a zero-sum game. It can't just be like awesome sets and then rubbish sets. Everything's got to be of above average quality. And you know, this is the same with anything in life. You've got to make sure you have decent to above average days more often than not. There's no point having an amazing week at work and then slacking the rest of the year. Your boss isn't going to like you like that. Yeah. So it's the same with training. Just be consistent, get a decent above average level of effort in on your training for 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. Same with your diet, same with relationships. It's same with everything. So I think we as men, we like to put our all into a couple of different fights that we talked about this last time. You know, we're gonna fall on our sword, right? But you have to kind of, I think when you get to a certain point where you're able to really push yourself, you have to moderate yourself. So this is why I just think performance is the best way to look at it.
No, yeah, that all makes sense. You know, obviously there's going to be a little bit of a drop off in performance just as you get towards the end of the set. You know, the exercises that you put at the beginning of your session are going to get the most love and the most energy. I guess for me, you know, when I know, like I tell myself, I'm like 9 reps or 10 reps, like before that first set, like I hype myself up. Like if I don't get this, I'm going to be very upset. Right. And I'm just like hyping myself up for this set. And like, if I don't beat the logbook on that first set, like I legitimately am like bummed. I'm like, oh no. And I'll film myself. And, you know, like I've showed you some of my footage where it's like, I don't film like all of my sets, obviously, but I've even with like dumbbell bench where I'll like come down and that last rep, I'll get like halfway up and then and I feel like my form breaks down. Like I'm very cautious of keeping my form the same. And then I lock it out and then I watch the video after. I'm like, oh, that didn't even look like how I perceive something. Yeah. It feels like such a grinder. And then you watch it and you're like, oh, that actually didn't look that bad. So I'm trying to gauge, you know, to me, like, or when I'm doing a squat set and that final squat, I swear to God, it feels like my back was rounding and all that, my knees were caving in. But then you watch it like, oh, that was a pretty rep. So I'm trying to get to the point where I can intuitively like feel out how hard I'm working. Cause it's like, you know, we all kind of, when we're beginners, we don't know how to push it, or we feel like we're pushing it, but we're not pushing it. And now I'm getting to a point where it's like, oh, am I digging myself into the ground? Am I pushing too hard on these sets, or am I not pushing hard enough? Like we discussed this last time, or we've discussed it via coaching, where it's like, you want to make sure your form is standardized and you're not like cheating your form to get an extra rep in. And I'm very cautious of that. I'm trying to keep all my reps looking the same. But sometimes if I film a set and that last set just feels like such a grinder, and I watch it back and I'm like, oh, it didn't look that bad. But I remember I showed you that one overhead press set where I was like here for like 5 seconds and I'm like, ugh! It's like, that's failure. Like I could bring the bar back down, but I'm not going anywhere with it. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of rambling at this point, but it's just kind of gauging whether or not you're working hard enough. And it's actually a little bit more like individual than people may think. You know, you have to kind of like figure that out for yourself, and maybe filming your sets is a good thing because that last rep can feel like such a grinder. But I guess that's why it's important to logbook.
I guess I asked you a question on that. I mean, when you do those sets, how does it make you feel afterwards in terms of your level of fatigue and readiness for the next set and the rest of the workout?
Yeah, like I feel like a bit of a workhorse because I'll do that and then I'll be like, oh yeah, like next set, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I'll give myself some time to rest. And then, I'm still getting in the rep range. Like it's not like I do like a set of 10 and then all of a sudden I do like a set of 3, like I'm still getting, but maybe I'll put so much into the first set that maybe my second set will actually be like a rep down or like one rep short. So it's nothing like severe. It's not like I do that one set then I'm like wiped out. If anything, like I don't feel like, let's say dumbbell bench, I'll do that really hard and then I'll do the 2 back off sets, and then when I go into like the single arm dumbbell row, I'm still feeling really fresh for that. Like I don't feel like overall like my fatigue and conditioning is really good. Like I don't feel like by the time I get to like the 4th exercise, 5th exercise, 6th exercise, that's when I start to like kind of like, I feel like that's normal though. Like you've been working out for an hour and a half, that last set of the last exercise, I'm pretty like, I'm going to work as hard as I can, but I'm not necessarily going to give it that same spirit as the very first set.
So the reason I asked about that, and just the last couple of minutes of teasing this out of you, I think it's a pretty clear indicator that it's okay for you to train to failure then, like it doesn't seem to take as much out of you as it would for somebody else. So I think this is why I say I'm not that concerned with whether people train to failure or not. It's more about performance increases, because that little conversation there was just evidence that for you, training to failure is fine and you can get away with it. You can still be pretty fresh. So why not take it? If it's there, why not take it? If you're ready to go 2 or 3 minutes later, that's great. If you can maintain a good degree of volume, that's also great. So I would say for yourself, in that case, I think keep at it, keep working that hard, and it's not impacting performance that much. Now, let's give an alternate perspective. Let's say you had a guy who took his first set to failure and went all the way. And his first set, he got 14 reps on a chest press. And then the next set, after a good, 2 or 3 minutes of rest, he got 8. Okay. And the next set after that, he got like 5. Now that guy, that's a massive rep drop off. Okay. With a reasonable rest period. Now, that's a guy where you think to yourself, he's just destroying himself set after set, and he's taking the same set to perceived failure as you are. But perhaps, well, on the one hand, he could be just being able to tap into his body more. Or on the other hand, he could just be recovering less between sets. We don't know, Is he physically better? Is he physically worse? We don't know. Also, it doesn't really matter. All we know is that for him, training to failure is probably not a good idea. And I gave you that example because that guy's me, right? So I used to post my training on Instagram pretty much 2 or 3 times a week. And one of the most common questions I would get is, why do your reps drop off so much? Because that would be me. 14 reps first set, like 8 the next, and then 5, but then I have to reduce the weight. And I think it's just the way people are built. I've told you my story loads of times. First year that I lifted, I ended up deadlifting like 420, squatting pretty high, except that some of it was partial, benching pretty decent as well. That's just in 1 year. I started off being very, very explosive. Now that doesn't mean I'm genetically more gifted for bodybuilding. It's just I was wired to be very, very strong from an early age. Now, for a guy like me, you probably think I'm wired to be that strong which is probably the same thing, which enables me to tap into really deep failure sets and really take my body there, which destroys me. Now, that's not better or worse. It's just the way it is. For hypertrophy, it's not better or worse. So for me, this is why train to failure is not something I tend to like doing. Because if I do it, I backslide. I can't do enough useful volume. So I backslide. So when I'm working with clients, and to make this kind of useful for people at home, I think you've got to judge it. The bottom line still got to be performance increases, because to take it right back, we have to bear in mind that performance increases, along with everything else being consistent and the reps being like fairly moderate and the volume being quite high, they are the most reliable short-term indicator that our muscles grew. They are more capable. It's like if you do long distance training and 1 year you can run for an hour and the next year you can run for 2 hours at a trot, you got better at running. It's an adaptation. Our adaptations to grow bigger muscles are more reps in the 5 to 20 to 30 range. So it's a good indicator. It's pretty good. I mean, people can screw it up. And, you know, we've talked about that loads on YouTube recently. Like, you can screw it up by chasing poundages over form, but assuming we're being sensible, keeping everything consistent, then performance increase is still the way to go. So I try to avoid people talking about failure too much, because there's so much variability there. And bear in mind, I'm a high intensity, you know, I was a high intensity guy. I grew up around here, same area as Dorian Yates. Everyone trains like that here. Everyone does. That's how I got my start in lifting. But it's just, I realized very quickly I needed more volume. I was different to most of the guys at the gym. So yeah, I think that's why I try to steer the conversation away from failure and more about, let's see what you need to do. Because you and I, we're very different in that respect. We've just sort of highlighted that. We're almost at the extreme opposite ends. Now, that might change for you later in life. It might not. For me, it never really changed. But I do know people where it does change as well. So yeah, I think that can be sort of answered. Your question there can be answered by saying, let's focus more on the totality of the workout and what do you need to do to progress. Yeah.
No, that all makes sense. One thing that it does make me think, maybe there is potential that I am going too hard on that first set, though, because, you know, if I look at the totality of the workout, maybe if I did just kind of hold back a little bit and then just, you know, inch up my progression over the weeks, maybe my whole workout would be a little bit better off. But I'm not sure. Maybe I'll have to kind of experiment with that a little bit.
On average, it seems to be the case that most people on average tend to do better, maybe about 1 or 2 reps away from absolute failure. Like that overhead press set you sent me, that was completely like 0 RAR. Had you attempted 1 more rep, you would have failed for sure. No doubt about that. So it seems to be the case that you could probably get away with maybe pulling back a rep or 2, which I think you'd agree is still hard training. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that will still let you do maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 more sets for the shoulders in that workout and still be pretty fresh for those sets. So in the end, what happens is you get more loading. So I think we've kind of got to recognize that extra rep or 2 at hard training, it might not necessarily give us much more than doing an extra 10 reps in another set. If we rest 3 minutes, and then another set of 8 after resting another few minutes, another set of 6. So I think where it gets to the crux point of failure is too much is if it drastically reduces how much we can do. And yeah, you're making great gains right now. Potentially there is a case to be made that if people are working so hard that it's just wrecking them for the majority of the session, then they might be better off just pulling back a little bit. But I do want to say at this point, just a caution for people listening, because I think you and I are quite extreme cases in that regard. Most people just aren't working that hard. You know, most people aren't doing those sets that you did for your overhead press on a weekly basis. They're just not. I know they're not. So for you guys listening at home, why I always say the first priority is to get you up to the point where you're working hard. And this is what I've done with you, Damien, as well. Work hard first. Then we can play around with the volume where we need to, if progress is lacking. For you, fortunately, progress has been fine. Every area has been moving up. But I have some people where I take the volume down, push the intensity up, and something stops progressing, like the upper body, for example, or the arms. It's like, okay, we've got a clue there. And I detailed this in a recent series of videos. Start with hard work first, and then add volume where necessary. And part of that might be just adjusting the intensity slightly to get more volume. But for most people listening, just start with the step one, which is work as hard as you can.
Mm-hmm. One thing that makes me think about too is, you know, we talked about that overhead press rep, and it's like it's a push movement, so it's very like the failure between push and pull is very different for me. You know, because like when it comes to a push movement, it's like, you know, you lock out, that's a rep. If I get to here, I don't count that as a rep, right? Like I could do this maybe for like a few little reps, but it's like, nah. Same thing with the dumbbell press. I have a lot of like a horizontal press. It's the same thing. Like I lock out, boom, that's a rep. But when it comes to a pulling movement, so like whether that's like the dumbbell row or like a lat pull down or whatever, it's kind of hard because at the end, it's just kind of range of motion. Like it doesn't have the same, like going to failure on like a pull movement it doesn't have the same like satisfying, like, boom, I locked out. It's more of just like, I think that's a rep. Oh, maybe that's a rep. Maybe that's a rep. Maybe. And then you're just doing this, you know, you're just doing those little baby reps at the end. So, yeah, like, I don't know. When it comes to pulling movements, it's a little different for me because it's almost like you just don't know when to stop. Like this. Because like I feel like at a certain point you're doing such little reps that it's like, how effective is that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two schools of thought to that, right? So you got this idea that the stretch position of the lengthened position causes more growth inch by inch than the shortened position. So for you guys listening at home, what I mean by lengthened is the stretch position, and by shortened, the contracted position. So if you look at a pull movement, you do the little half reps in the stretch position. Same with a press movement. You do them down here. With a, with a pull movement, you do them with the arms stretched out. So you're doing the partial ranges of motion in the stretch position in both. Now, there is an argument to be said, which I'm not sure is fully there yet, but there's an argument to be said that, yeah, it might be worth adding in some partial reps in the lengthened position. I think that gets pretty high level though, and then you've also got to bear in mind, well, how are you going to count that, and also, is it going to cause a disproportionate amount of fatigue, which is, like we just finished talking about, is going to affect the rest of your workout. So yeah, I mean, how do you end a row? I would personally end it if I don't get the row to my chest, assuming every other rep, you know, has gotten to my chest. Again, standardized range of motion, standardized form. As soon as that breaks, for me, that's failure, because I failed to hit the form. I know for some guys like Jeffrey Verity Schofield, he has a different, I don't want to speak for him, but I think he has somewhat of a different perspective on where the set ends. Is that, and I'm not sure how he classes failure, but basically he'll do a set, he'll fail in the technical position, and then he'll carry on. Whether he considers that to be past failure or not, I'm not too sure. But the point is, he'll purposely do those little partial reps, and that's cool. I think, as we've established in the first part of this talk, for some people that might be too much because it might affect the rest of the workout. And I am not convinced, I'm 100% not convinced that it's worth pushing that one set that far if it means it's going to wreck you for the rest of the workout. If you can do it, if you're like Jeffrey and you can do it, cool, great. But yeah, I wouldn't say that's universal for everyone. So again, it comes down to performance increases.
So for someone like you would just make sure that your form is standardized, and as soon as your form breaks down, you kind of call that.
Yeah, I mean, I have done it the other way. There's a video of me on YouTube where I take a chest supported row, firstly to failure on my own, then I do 3 forced reps with a partner, and then I do 3 partial reps. And I'm just done. And I remember that workout. I was good for nothing after that. So
you're like, all right, going home.
Yeah, I mean, so I asked myself, what's the point? You know, I just wrecked myself for an extra 6 beyond failure reps, and I can do that. You know, I can do that. I have no problem doing that. But it means the rest of my workout is just good for nothing. And so my overall volume gets reduced to the point where I actually regress. I make less gains. And I did a short low volume phase recently. Did it for like 2 weeks, and I went backwards.
Yeah.
You know, everything to failure, beyond failure with a training partner, and I go backwards. I lose strength, I lose muscle reliably every single time. There's a period of about a week where I gain some strength because it's almost like a peaking effect. Then within the second and third week, I'm regressing rapidly. I need a good amount of volume to continue to gain. So yeah, I did a series on that recently on DC training, but for me, that has never worked. And it sounds attractive. It sounds pretty cool, but honestly, between you and me, about everyone listening, I guess, is I think a lot of the low volume advocates, they just need to turn around and admit to themselves they just don't like being in the gym. That's what it is. I mean, Jesus, just do the work, you know? Like, yeah, just do one set. I mean, if it was that easy, I think if you were so gifted that you could just do one set, but from what I see around here, because it's very popular around here, most of those guys are either fooling themselves or they're on drugs. There is one guy I know in my hometown who's an absolute monster. He can do the one set to failure training and he's natural. And he doesn't BS. He does it, he gains. But everybody else who does it is either drugged up to the eyeballs or they're just fooling themselves. Or both. It just doesn't work. And I've coached so many people at this point, and I've experimented with low volume approaches. Almost unanimously, it doesn't work. People, and I think it's because, well, there was this whole big kick recently about minimalism sucks, and Alex from Alpha Destiny made a video on that. Landon did, and I did as well. Freaky D did too. And the reason it doesn't work is not necessarily because low volume sucks. It's simply because if you apply minimalism to every single body part, you're onto a loser, because it's just unlikely that you have a low volume requirement for absolutely everything. Then you're fitting into an ideology, like a religion almost. You're not doing what you need to do to progress. And for me, I've always been fairly agnostic when it comes to my training approach. I do what it takes. And partly that's because I've been a powerlifter most of my life, so it doesn't really matter if I believe low volume works. If I go to the national and I get, you know, trumped by some other guy who does what it takes, then all of my theory goes out the window because the numbers don't add up. So that's why my competition has always forced me to be very realistic. And that's why I've never had any kind of leaning towards one particular type of approach. It's always appropriate volume. And now I kind of unfairly get the reputation as being the high volume guy. I'm not really. You know, I'm not. Appropriate volume. Yeah.
No, man. No, that's a good mindset. The low intent or the high intensity crowd, like the very extreme ends of it, I haven't really watched. I know Alex Bromley put out a video on some guy preaching some stuff, and I was just like, yeah, that guy, his attitude pissed me off. I was just like, bro, like, I hate that, like, religious, like, one set to failure. Like, dude, like, even when you programmed me to do two, like, you asked me to just try 2 sets. And I did that for a while, but then eventually I was like, yeah, but I could hit a third. You know what I'm saying? Like I like being in the gym, you know, like I feel I'm in the, you know, and I don't like being in the gym for 3 hours, but like, you know, an hour and a half workout is not bad for me. And that's not like I'm not like training for an hour and a half, you know, do my warm up, hit the set, you know, an hour and a half. I give myself about an hour and a half. And if I'm doing some cardio at the end, I'll even be in there for 2 hours maybe, because I like being in the gym. So like if I went in there and just did 1 set to failure, it'd be like a 20-minute workout. And then I'd be like, oh, okay, I just go home. Like what?
Can you imagine loading up all those plates for a leg press and then just doing 1 set? And if once I finally got all the leg press plates loaded up, right, I don't want to move. I'm there for a few sets at least. I'm gonna get my money's worth.
Yeah, like I've walked these heavy dumbbells over to this bench. Like I don't want to just do 1 set and then call it a day. Yeah. One question I did want to ask you is, you know, you've seen my training, you've seen that I push it pretty hard, but I rarely get sore. And I don't hear a lot of people talk about soreness necessarily, but like how often should someone who trains consistently be sore? Because I rarely get sore unless it's like I bring in a new movement or what I'm meaning to ask you is, like, is soreness an indicator of anything? Like if you're getting too sore too often, is that a bad thing? Let's say you're getting sore every week. Like to me, that would be like, I'm not recovering. I'm not sleeping properly or something. Yeah, I would like you to go in on that a little bit.
Well, I definitely think it's an indicator of something. I'm not one of these people who thinks that soreness is just useless. I think it's a case of if we don't have a great deal of research on it, and it's not quite clear yet its role, but it does have a role to play. It means something. Now, in terms of where we see it the most, we see it the most, like you just said, when you bring in a new movement, when you do something unusual. So let's say you're normally doing sets of 5 for the squat. The first time you do a set of 20 on a leg press, continuous, you're going to be sore. It is what it is. And some areas just get more sore than others. Like hamstrings get notoriously sore. Triceps for me, chest for me gets really sore. Quads somewhat. But there are some body parts that get sore more than others. So there's that. Now, in terms of how we reduce soreness, generally, you train a lot. You train, I think, 5-6 days a week now. And like for a guy like yourself, especially when you're training each body part, roughly directly every 3 days, indirectly probably 4 days a week, you're not going to get that sore because your body's just used to it. So there's no newness for you. So when it comes to people who get very sore all the time, they're either one of two things. First one is they're purposely chasing soreness. They're chasing the unique aspect of soreness. And you normally see this with, your typical bro bodybuilders down at the gym or pro bodybuilders. They'll train everything once a week and it'll always be different. Like there's a few guys who go to the gym and they go in for the leg day every Wednesday, and every Wednesday it's something different. They might do leg extensions 1 week to begin. Next week they might do squats. I mean, they'll never do squats, but they'll do leg presses, stuff like that. But it's always different, and it's the same with pro bodybuilders. Usually, it's always different.
I don't get that. It's like, how do you even progress with that?
It was quite funny. I was watching a Fouad Abiad podcast, and I think it was that Ben Chow said that some of the guys in the UK, they just do the same routine every week. Like he's like, yeah, they just do the same thing every week, and then they try and improve on it. And Fouad is like, they do the same thing every week and try to improve on it. Like it was just mind blowing for him. And I'm like, holy shit! Just imagine being so genetically gifted that you just didn't give a shit about even the basic programming, like double progression. Who gives a fuck? I'll just take it. Like. Yeah. A routine. Why would I want a routine? I would just do random shit and then I win the Olympia. That just makes sense, right? So, I mean, I guess if you're that gifted and you take that much training, who gives a fuck, right? Yeah. But that does happen. But yeah, so those kind of people will get a lot of soreness, and it's kind of like that's what they look for, which is fine. I mean, you can't argue if they get results, but I think that's why they're getting quite sore. It's the uniqueness and it's the lack of frequency. So for someone like yourself, you're on a routine where you're progressively getting stronger every week reliably because you're doing the same routine. You're also training your body part at least twice a week directly. You're just not going to get that sore. Now, the other aspect, I said two things. The other thing is people who do have a regular routine and consistently get sore. And there is a genetic element. For them, they're probably just doing too much. So I've got one guy in the books right now. He trains very similar to yourself, 6 days a week, twice a week body parts, and he's always sore. Like something is always sore. And I've pulled his volume back, but he just always gets sore. That's just his training life. Doesn't matter if it's high volume or moderate volume or whatever. He just always something is always sore, and it hasn't affected his progress. So for him, it's a genetic element. I would say for other people, if they're getting excessively sore, and I have had this as well when I'm trying to figure out somebody's volume tolerance. Let's say, for example, I put them on a moderate amount of usually hamstrings, and they just get debilitatingly sore. I have to pull them back because they're probably leading to an injury. This one guy I've got on the books right now, I've kind of figured out with him, he's not in any danger. It's just his body. But for some people, if they're getting excessively sore all the time, and it's usually in one unusual body part like hamstrings or chest, you've got to pull them back because they're going to hurt themselves. So, and that's for a guy on a regular routine with a moderate amount of volume. So it takes some figuring out. I think there are other clues to figure out whether it's an overtraining thing or whether it's just the unusualness of the routine. So it gets a bit complicated, but yeah, those are there's 2 or 3 categories of people that I see who get excessively sore a lot.
Okay, cool. I did want to go into joint pain a little bit too. It's like, for me, I told you like I had that elbow elbow thing come up for a little bit, but it went away. It's just like sometimes if I push certain things a little bit too hard, I'll have like a little elbow thing, or it's not. It's as soon as I back off for like a few days that it goes away. So it's never like something that's like reoccurring or an issue. But I did notice like this actually happened like this is probably like 6 months ago now. If I was training, like I was trying to get my bicep curl like pretty heavy, like barbell bicep curl. And I noticed that the tendon, I guess the one that connects to my shoulder here would get irritated. That if I went to a dumbbell bench press, I'd get like that sharp little pain that would kind of kick off there. And I kind of noticed like, oh, if I do this, it causes joint pain or tendon pain, whatever you want to call it. Not a good like muscle pain thing. And then just like little injuries, like that glute thing I got going on. And just, I know like a lot of people we're human beings, we're flesh and blood. Like we're going to get dinged up from this like hard training. I'm just kind of wondering what would you say to people that are just, they have like little, like when should we kind of push through an aches and pain versus, you know, because I know some people like to baby, oh, my shoulder can't work out. Like, oh, you know, there's people like that, like, oh, my low back, right? But in reality, like if they kind of like, you know, put some blood in the area, it would be beneficial versus the people that are like, oh, I'm just going to ignore the fact that my spine feels like it's breaking and I'm just going to push through. What's your kind of take on that working with people?
So, I mean, you'll know I kind of sidebar on the babying it. So I said with the glute thing, let's keep an eye on it week by week, and with the elbow, let's keep an eye on it week by week. So here's kind of my thoughts on that. I think there's a professional way of dealing with it and an amateur way of dealing with it. The professional way of dealing with it is to tackle it head on. Now, most of the time, tendinitis doesn't get better; it only gets worse. Or tendinosis, it doesn't really get better; it only gets worse. And so, if you carry on doing what you're doing, it's just going to get progressively worse and worse because it's a sign of some kind of degeneration. Now, then there's the amateur way of dealing with it, which is to say, right, I'm just going to ignore it, I'm going to carry on, and then hopefully it gets better. So there is some nuance there. I think I prefer to deal with things in a professional way. If it's a problem, we tackle it head on. But I need to know for certain if it's a problem. So like with your elbow thing, it was a case of let's monitor it. Sometimes you just sleep wrong. Sometimes it's maybe an extra rep you attempt, a little bit too much. Like the bicep curl is a perfect example of that. The bicep curl we do pretty heavy, and it's the one arm exercise that you do which is heavier than the rest. That in combination with chest pressing, which also affects the bicep tendon at the shoulder, can just be a bit too much. I think it's important to say at this point as well, the body can recover from a hell of a lot. I think there is no optimal form for the body. All these like biomechanic geeks, they've got it all wrong. The body is an amazingly adaptive machine. Like it's incredible. You know, we've run thousands of miles and God knows what else. We are amazingly adaptive. But what the body doesn't like is excessive loading too quickly that it can't recover from, that it can't adapt to.
Yes.
We can adapt to a hell of a lot. We can adapt to mostly everything. But as long as we introduce that slowly. So where we have something like the pain with the bicep, is a pretty clear indicator that for that acute week or day or session, we just tried to do a bit too much. Now, odds are the next session, you didn't try that extra like 3 reps, you know, you didn't really sort of scream it up there, and it just gives the body some time to adapt. So that wasn't a problem. This is why I always make sure, is it actually a problem before we start to rehab it? Like with the glute, for example, we're just managing that now. That doesn't seem to be getting any worse. Doesn't really seem to be getting any better. It's just kind of there, and that's okay. It's fine. So we'll manage that. But as soon as we start to see signs that okay, this is turning into an injury, we've got to pull back and aggressively attack it. And that's I think it would save people a lot of time if they did that. I think what will happen is people will use the amateur mindset over and over again until one time where they get it wrong, and then wham, they're effed. They've got that permanent knee injury, the permanent shoulder injury, the permanent lower back injury. And then it's like their training just takes a downhill shift. And they think, well, why is it different this time? Well, it's different this time because you got old. So I prefer from even my young guys like yourself and guys younger than yourself and the girls, whoever, I say, we attack it like a professional. So I'm always very quick to hone in on pain signs because you've got to learn from the beginning, because you know all my clients at some point they're going to fly the nest, they're going to leave and do their own thing. They need to understand that when they're on their own and they get a pain, let's say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when they're older, when their body's not quite as young, you need to remember what I told you and attack it aggressively. Back off, rehab. And I want to make sure that you guys know how to rehab and how to attack it properly, but also have the mentality of saying, okay, I've got an ache and pain. It's not the end of the world. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do what I need to rehab it immediately so it doesn't become a long-term problem, because the older you get, the quicker that turns into a long-term problem. You can get away with a hell of a lot in your 20s and maybe early 30s. As soon as people start to hit about the 32, 33 age range, anywhere between 28 to 32 is where things start to go wrong, if they're going to go wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's where people will think to themselves, wow, I would just train through this soreness when I was younger. Nothing's really changed, but it has. You've changed. So you need to know how to attack it with a professional attitude. And that is, as soon as you've established it is the bad pain and it is potentially an injury, back off, rehab, done. Mm-hmm. Get it sorted, move on with your life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I used to deal with a lot of chronic back pain, so I looked into a lot of pain science and trying to figure things out, and I got to a point where I was like, movement is medicine. If my lower back was, I had an issue with it was like low to mid back, just like right in the spine, something was going on, went to a doctor. Oh, it looks good to us. I'm like, yeah, but it fucking hurts. So what am I going to do about that? And then I just, instead of babying it, because, you talked about like biomechanics nerds, they act like the body is like so fragile. And I think there's a balance between like, hey, if you do a row with us, like it's even like the rounding back thing. Yes. If you put a barbell on your back and you've never lifted in that position and you round like crazy, and you might snap some shit up. But then you have these people that are doing like Zercher deadlifts with like 400 pounds with the steel cables running along their spine.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I don't want to like baby things, but at the same time, like for me, when I did have the back shit, I just started super slow. I was like, okay, I'm just going to do high rep, just pump blood into the area and then just work up to that. I remember like, I would do like one plate on Romanian deadlift, and the next day my back would be like an excruciating pain. And then I'd be like, oh, fuck. It's like, I just want to do a deadlift, man. Like, this is like depressing. So I'd go to like a back extension and I just keep on going, just pumping blood into the muscle, getting a little bit stronger on back. I would find a movement that worked to rehab the area that didn't cause discomfort the next day. And then I just keep loading and loading and loading. I'm like, okay, well, I'm pretty strong on this. Then eventually I went to the RDL, and then maybe I got a little bit of discomfort the next day. But then I noticed next time I did it, I didn't. So I was like, oh, wow, wicked. And then as soon as I rehabbed, my back is, well, that was quite a few years ago. Like, my back's been really good. But then I did an RDL in the summertime, and I just went way too heavy. I kind of was ego lifting a little bit, and I pulled my right glute just a little bit. And it was like, it wasn't like, I didn't snap shit up to a crazy degree, but it was an acute injury. I was like, oh, right glute. And then it kind of went away. But then I've noticed that my right glute acts up a little bit. I'm like, fuck, did I do some but some days I'll do like heavy hinges, no problem. Other days I'll feel it a little bit. I'm like, okay, well, I don't think it's damaged because I can do a heavy hinge and nothing's getting fucked up, but it's clearly something still there lingering. So I'm like, well, should I avoid heavy hinges for a while and just do some like glute stuff? Like, sometimes it's hard to make a call on how to rehab an area, or if a pain is actually telling you something or not. Because sometimes with pain science, we don't know a lot about it. And sometimes you can have like ghost pain where your body doesn't really know, or your body thinks it's still in trouble, but not necessarily. Like, that's a very like messy field. Like, we don't know much about that, but it's hard to know what to do.
I think if there is something there, it might be some scar tissue, which you need to kind of crunch. So the body has a way of just creating this scar tissue, and as you heal, but it's more of a kind of a gauze over the wound. So if you kind of crunch that out a little bit, it can just heal a bit better and form actual tissue there. But yeah, so something I want to say about injuries is, okay, this is my stance. The movement that hurts you is the movement that will heal you in therapeutic dosages. So the movement that hurt you is the movement that will heal you in therapeutic dosages. Now, what I mean by that is, if you hurt your lower back, say with a deadlift, then do a hip hinge really, really light. And you can do that pretty much every day. The way that I've rehabbed because I hurt my back a couple of years ago, and I've known this method for many years, but I was unfortunate to suffer a lower back injury a couple of years ago, a non-lifting accident, and essentially it was excruciating pain, just took my breath away kind of pain.
I remember you talking about that.
Yeah, horrible. So I started off with Romanian deadlifts with 20 kilo bar, just a regular Olympic bar, and I would do 3 sets of 15 every day, and I just built up for 2.5 kilos every single day, and it probably took, I think, in total about a month to even reach a plate aside. And I built up, kept going up, but eventually it kind of fixed my back, and now it's pretty good. The only thing that bothers it now is squats in the bottom position. Go figure. So now that is my stance. I think where people mess that up is that they break the cycle and they think, okay, I'm going okay, let me attempt a heavier weight. They think I'm fine. But I think what you have to understand with injuries is you have to treat injuries as in, not that I'm injured, I need to wait to get better. Treat it as if you are injured and now you are weak. People don't understand that. They think there's injured and not injured. There isn't. When you get injured, your strength dips like this. You need to build yourself back up as if you were a beginner again. What people think happens is, I'm injured for a while, now I'm okay, let me go back and attempt a weight. Snap. Well, actually, what you're doing is you're attempting a weight up here, when at the moment your strength is down here. And that's every single time I see where people screw it up, because people are okay with thinking they're injured, but nobody likes to think of themselves as weak. Yeah, I'm injured, but I'm a 5-plate squatter. No, you're not. Not anymore. Right now, you're a 20 kilo squatter, and that's all you've got. And you need to build back up again. They don't like that. No one likes to admit they're weak. People are happy to admit they're afflicted with an injury or afflicted with a condition. That's true of everything in life. No one likes to admit they're just shit, right? It was quite funny, actually. I remember I did my second strongman competition, and it was the stones, and I just really sucked at the stones. And I remember my mate Mike was there. I said, and Mike's a pretty decent strongman. And I said, yeah, Mike, I just need some practice at the stones. He's like, no, Faz, you're just weak. I was like, okay, fair enough. Give me the real talk. But the thing is, you need to hear that. You need to hear that sometimes. And I don't think people like to hear that. It's like with anything in life. So people would rather hear that they have a condition than they're just shit and they just need practice. Because being shit is taking responsibility for what's happened. Like, yes, you were injured. Maybe you were unlucky. Maybe something happened. Maybe you were an idiot. But the fact is, you were injured and now you suck. You're down here. You need to build back up again. It's not a temporary affliction. It's not something which is out of your control. It is very much in your control. You can fix it most of the time. So yeah, I think people need to bottom line with that is people need to reapproach your mentality when they're injured. It's not a temporary state. It is a position you're in, which means you are weak and you need to build yourself slowly back up out of it. It's not just a temporary affliction, which is going to go next week like you've got a cold or a flu, which is you'll be fine the week after. It's not the same. You've been injured. Structural integrity is rock bottom. You need to build it up.
Yeah, I know that makes sense. Those are all great points. Yeah, there's an emotional aspect to getting injured too, right? Like it's not just a physical thing. Even when my back was really sore, being like a guy in my early 20s and my back's I felt like a crippled old man. I'm like, how is my back fucked up? Like I was like, I'm so passionate about fitness, but I would get like emotional because like my back was getting in the way. Because like your back is so like the structural integrity of your back is everything. To like every movement, you need a strong back. And I remember just being like, okay, well, what are my options? Like not do anything physical, feel like shit, be depressed all the time, or just figure it out. Just fucking go down, like exhaust every single option to fix my shit. Because at the end of the day, it's like, I kind of wonder if I had just played the victim, like, oh, because you'll hear a lot of people say things like, oh, I have a bad back. You know, John's got a bad back. It's like, does he though? Like, did you go to a doctor and like you have like an actual like mechanic, like there's something like an actual diagnosable issue, or is it just like weak? Because I wonder how many people they have something go on like, oh no, my elbows, I got bad. You hear a lot of trades guys or people that do like a lot of blue collar work will be like, oh, my wrists are fucked from whatever. And maybe they are. Like, I'm not saying they're not, but I wonder how many of those people just kind of like accept their low back issue. It's like, well, have you ever tried a back extension before? It's like, I've never seen you exercise, you know. And a lot of people who do hard physical labor will you know, probably get some issues, just like overuse issues that come from the gym. But the thing about the gym is you can actually like target things, and, you know, it's not like the real world where you don't really get it. Like, how often are you just like pumping blood into your low back through a back extension in the real world? You don't. So I wonder how many people just, they get snapped up and they kind of lose hope, but in reality, like, they could fix it.
I think muscle's the great equalizer there. One of the worst consequences of downsizing, which I did over the last few years, is that I picked up more injuries than ever because I downsized. You know, I sort of lost that protective padding that muscle gives you. That's when I got my shoulder injury. It's when I got my lower back injury. And I think one of the worst things you can do is just not take advantage of lifting weights. Some of it's just age, of course it is, and just having a body that's in lifting. But yeah, I think everybody should take advantage of lifting weights and the protective effect it has, for sure. I have this one school friend of mine, and she's constantly messaging me whenever I post up something like with my back, saying, "Oh, be careful of your back, that would break me in half." And she's got a really bad back. And I said, have you ever tried doing some exercise on it? She says, no, I couldn't do that. Surely that would help, you know, strengthen the back. But again, it's part of that whole personal responsibility thing. Like I was saying, I think people are happier to believe they have a bad back rather than this is in my control and I'm just weak. No one likes to hear they're weak. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool, man. I did have a couple more things written down here that we can dive into quick, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I was talking to you about running. So say you are doing squats as your main leg movement, and then you were I guess the question is like repeating an exercise between sessions. So say you're doing like chest A and B, or so chest A and then chest B on like the other day, but instead of like alternating exercises, say you're doing like dumbbell bench and then barbell bench on the second day. What if you just connect with a movement really well? Is there a issue with, you know, just doing dumbbell bench on both days? Because then you could, rather than doing like alternate days, your days could just kind of be the same. And like, instead of doing like variation for the sake of variation, like, could you just run a movement into the ground? Because I know we talk about, you know, the minimalist thing being bad, and I agree. But sometimes when I connect with a movement, like, I was like, well, I can't do single dumbbell rows this week because when I'm building my program, it's like, I got to do something different because, you know, variation is good for hypertrophy. But then I'll do something else. Like I tried the Meadows rows and I was like trying to like them. But then I was like, you know what? I literally just stopped doing them, walked back over and just started doing single dumbbell rows. I'm like, oh, this feels way better. So it's like, there's certain movements that I just connect with. And I'm wondering, you know, like, do you have to force the variation, or should you just run something into the ground?
You have to earn it. You have to earn it. So with, I mean, you've never had this experience of working with me as a beginner, because when you came to me, you were already established a good amount of muscle, but all of my beginners will tell you they're doing the same rotation either 2 or 3 times a week for sure. If it's an upper lower, it's the same twice a week. If it's a full body, it's the same 3 times a week. Because in the beginning, you can recover so rapidly and improve. It's better to do the same thing over and over again. And this is one of the areas where beginners will mess up, because they'll do an advanced program because they want to make progress faster. That's their intentions are, I want to get big fast, so I'm going to use Arnie's routine or Coleman's routine or whoever. But the reality is they're shooting themselves in the foot, because if they did just the bench, let's say the bench press 3 times a week for a guy who benches just the bar, rank beginner, he can not only recover and improve 3 times a week, but his ligaments and joints aren't going to be taxed at all, because whose ligaments aren't capable of handling a 20-kilo bar? No one's. So he can make rapid progress in that time. Now, as you start to get stronger, there will be a point where you have to introduce variation, and that's when you've earned it. And so that point varies for different people, but from what I've seen on average, and all the people I've worked with, it's roughly at the point where you're benching about, say, 1.5 plates for 5 to 10 reps.
Yeah, you know? I lost the connection there for a little bit.
Okay.
So I might have missed some stuff there. Sorry. Go from the, I just asked, like, so you got to earn your variation. So just go.
Yeah, so you got to earn your variation. So you got to earn your variation. So as a beginner, let's say you're ranked beginner, just benching the bar, you can bench and improve 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because you train Monday, you'll come back on Wednesday, you'll be able to do 22.5. Come back Friday, you can do 25. Great. You just keep that up. Now, nobody's ligaments are getting stressed out by a 20 kilo, 25 kilo bench press. So you can do that often enough and just keep hammering it. And this is where the beginner will go wrong, because they'll want to do an advanced routine, but the advanced routine will have them doing a lift maybe once every week or once every 2 weeks. And so as a result, they're getting far less frequent practice. What will be better is just to get better on one particular movement that they're pretty suited to. As a beginner, beginners don't really have favorite movements. They just have like pet movements which they think are going to be good for them. You know, like bench press, everyone loves. Squat, not many people do. They do leg press, you know, stuff like that, right? So it's an emotional attachment. It's not an actual good exercise they connect with. So there'll be a point where you exhaust that capability, and let's say you get to the point where you're squatting on Monday and you have to squat again Wednesday. It's just not going to be possible, because either mentally or physically you're not going to be able to do it. That's when you introduce variation. And so if somebody's doing something like a full body routine, that's when I'll introduce a heavy, light, medium system. So the Wednesday session will be a leg extension. The Friday session will be a leg press. So all of a sudden we have morphed from a beginner routine to a heavy, light, medium. If it's an upper lower, it's something similar. I'll have an all basic upper lower, basic upper, basic lower with barbell movements. And then the upper lower later in the week will be mostly machines, cables, dumbbells, lighter exercises for maybe different rep ranges, for maybe even different rest periods. So there's an inbuilt regulation there. That's earning the variation. Now, you can then extend that out even further. And this is what I do with my even stronger guys. Let's say guys who are now benching. So, okay, for that, okay, I was going to say that point will normally come at about 1.5 plate to 2 plate bench. That's when you need to stop doing it twice a week because it's too much. So you'll split it up into doing different lifts. Now, at a certain other point, maybe even further on, when they're starting to reach advanced stage, like maybe a 2 plate bench or a 2.5 plate bench, you know, a 3 plate squat, 3.5 plate squat, then you might have to introduce even more variation. So then you might have an upper A, upper B, and upper C, but you're still training 4 days a week, but you do every lift, say, every 10 days. So that was even more variation, because it's really cool, because you can train the body part as often as you did when you were a beginner. So you're still getting those growth stimuluses as often as you did as a beginner. But what you're not getting is you're not hammering the same movement pattern. So it's less ligament stress, less neuromuscular stress, you know, less, all that is taken away to a certain extent, but you're still able to do a reasonable amount of volume. It's just you're not stressing the areas of the body which we're not as concerned about. Like, we don't really care about the ligaments and tendons. They just need to be reasonably strong. We need to keep them healthy. What we do want to do is we want to impose a stimulus on the muscle. And so, yeah, you earn your variety. So you could go from lifting, let's say, let's stick with the full body approach, because I like full body. In the beginner, full body, same exercise, train a body part 3 times a week. Great. As you get more advanced, intermediate stage, you train a body part 3 times a week still, but you do a different lift. Heavy, light, medium. Then as you get even more advanced, you flip it, so perhaps you have different lifts for different weeks as well. So all of a sudden you got a ton of variation, and that will come with even more volume, because the more variety you do, the more volume you can get away with as well. So we've got this amazing situation where we can maintain a high degree of volume even if you're advanced lifting very, very heavy weights, because you're just cycling through all these variations. And that is how you can get around the fact that you're actually really strong, but you can still get a decent amount of volume in. So for the very advanced guys, I only really have them squatting maybe once every 10 days, once every even 14 days. Same with deadlifts, same with leg presses. And in the meantime, they're still training the body part 2 or 3 times a week, or whatever is appropriate for them. But that's a really nice hypertrophy system. So hypertrophy is very forgiving. You don't have to hammer away at the same exercise. There's no lift to be contested like a power lift. With hypertrophy, you just need to train the muscle. So train the muscle as often as you can. Use a reasonable amount of volume. Rotate the exercises to allow you to do that, because the exercises aren't that important. The volume is important. The intensity is important. Hitting the body part frequently is important with enough volume. Yeah.
Cool, man. No, that all makes sense. All right. The last topic I wanted to get into was, you know, something we've kind of discussed, because when I first came to you, I was like, oh, like I kind of was detrained because I had that back injury. Then I got my appendix removed and I couldn't lift for like 3 weeks. So I was just kind of like, oh, I feel like shit. And it's kind of funny. You get laid off, like you don't work out for like 2 weeks and you're just like, I'm a shell of my former self. You look at yourself in the mirror and like, did I lose that much muscle? I did. I could tell my legs got smaller and I could tell like certain areas were a little smaller. And I was like, my body composition changed a little bit after like 3 weeks of not training, but it wasn't that bad. But I like the way you look at yourself, like literally just like 1 week of working out. I'm like, oh, I look fucking good again. It's this crazy like mental thing that happens. But anyway,
you remember it in the morning. I mean, you wake up in the morning, go to the toilet, and you look completely different to your pump the previous day in the gym.
Like, yeah, like, I look like shit.
I'll go back to bed.
Yeah, that's funny. But I came to you and I was like, oh, I think I need to do a cut because I'm like sloppy, right? And then I think you were kind of surprised that I wanted to do a cut, but I was like, okay, well, I just kind of want to I want to just like tighten things up before I do a bulk again. And then, like you kind of hinted at some things and you're like, well, you need to just like build some muscle because ultimately that's what's going to get you leaner. And like the whole idea, this is actually kind of like, this is like the idea. It's like bulking ultimately leads to a leaner physique, which is like, oh, how does that work? That doesn't make any sense. But I want you to go into that because like the way you framed it to me is like, if I just keep trying to, like I want to get down, I want to have abs and build muscle. It's like this, we talk about this, like the whole idea of like all these natural guys, like just staying so lean all the time. Yeah. It's like even like professional or like natural bodybuilding, like the actual like shows and stuff. Like I don't like those shows because all those guys are small. Like, what I'm saying? Like they're just always dieting. So they never get, and then you see someone like Jeffrey who actually like bulks and like puts on meat. And you're like, yeah, like that's the shit I like. Or, and like the silver era guys, those dudes put on some fluff and they were actually big and aesthetic. And I like that look. It's like, I'm not like set on having abs, but I'm also like cautious of like bulking up too much. Cause right now I'm like 18-20%, which a lot of people, when you say 20%, they're like, oh, you can't bulk any more than that, bro. Like you're at 20%, you're a fat person. But I'm like, I'm really not a fat person though. Like in a shirt, I don't look fat. Like, boy, I take my shirt off. I got like a little bit of a healthy belly, right? And no,
you don't have a belly.
What I'm saying is like, I don't have a belly, but if I went on Instagram and looked at like,
oh, right.
You know what I'm saying? So a lot of people in my, like, and to me, like I don't have body dysmorphia. I don't have like some weird thing. For me, it was like, I just wanted to cut to clean up so I could like bulk for longer. But then ultimately when you hinted at the fact that like, you just need to build muscle, man, like stop. And I was just like, oh, you don't need to tell me twice. Fuck, I can eat again. Sweet, let's go. But at the same time, it's this like back and forth thing. And it's like, okay, if I bulk up, I just don't want to get too crazy because I hate dieting. But I hate the fact that like I won't build like enough muscle. Then I'll have to cut down. And then I'm just doing this like bullshit, like back and forth. And I want to avoid that. So it's like my main goal is to build muscle, which will ultimately allow me to eat more and stay leaner in the future. So I want to go into that because I think that's kind of a funny take, is like bulking ultimately leads to a leaner physique, which is true if you do it right.
I think the purgatory that you want to avoid being in, which I think a large proportion of people are in, probably a lot of people who listen to this podcast will find this familiar, is that they want to be the finished product right now. They look at Instagram or whatever, and they want to have the big shoulders, the big traps, the big delts with the tight waist. And so the quickest way to do that in their minds is to diet down. Well, then they diet down, and either halfway through dieting down, they think, you know what, this is really hard, and I'm not sure I can manage the cut all the way. Or they get right down to the cut weight and they realize they've got no muscle. So then they bulk back up again. Sometimes they bulk too fast, and then they roll into that kind of cycle. I think the big problem is you can't live in that purgatory, because you're not you, but like people will chase temporary gains, temporary sort of improvements in their physique. What they're actually looking for though is they're looking to be like the finished product of a guy who's done it for 20 years, or a guy who's done it for 10 years, or a guy who's been juicing his face off for 3 years. That's what they're trying to get, but they're focusing on just the leanness. I think in terms of what I've seen with clients that I've trained, like one of my very early clients was a guy called Mark, and he was in a similar position to you. He was similar kind of body fat. He didn't look, you know, outwardly fat or anything, but I bulked him hard. Like we gained on, like I think it was like 25 pounds altogether, natural guy as well. And that was way above what he was comfortable with. You know, he was force feeding it in, loads of training, high volume training, absolutely brutal. He hated me at the time. And and then he cut down, and now he just walks around pretty damn lean. In fact, if you look at my Instagram, he's one of the guys, is the pin story. It's the before and after. And he put on something like 12 pounds of lean muscle, which for a natural is a hell of a lot. But the thing is, it took him above how much he was comfortably eating before. So now he has to really actively eat a lot of food to keep up with it. And he's lean because he trains hard. He's able to just maintain that leanness. So the way that I think about it is, let's say, like take me, for example, most of my life, 90 kilos was roughly my like baseline. That's where my body would gravitate towards to. So what I would do is I would cut down to say 80, 85 kilos, push back up again to 95 to 100. Every time I reapproached 90, I was leaner and leaner on more food as well. So that's the goal. Over the course of say 5-10 years time, the more often you go down and back up in body weight, the more muscle you build. And every time you reapproach that baseline of where you're at, which for you is about 190 pounds, 200 pounds, you should be more muscular, as in more muscle, less fat, larger metabolism. And over time, that is how it's done. Now, I think if people are just constantly chasing leanness and then rushing the bulk back up because it's an unnatural level of smallness for them, they're not supposed to be that small, it's going to cause problems. They're always going to be either dieting or just super rebounding really fast. That you can't build muscle like that. To build muscle, you need a constant small surplus for a long amount of time. I think for you, and this is true for you, and I think it's true for probably a lot of people, you need to be a lot bigger than you are now. I don't think where you're at now is,
yeah.
yeah. What I mean by that is, that could have come out wrong. I didn't mean,
you need to get fucking bigger, bud. I
didn't mean it like that. What I meant was, I think your body is capable of holding a lot more muscle. Looking at your frame, looking at how you hold yourself, look at your frame, your joints and all that, I think you're capable of holding a lot more muscle. So I think your body needs to grow a lot more for you to be comfortably eating quite a lot of food and maintaining leanness. I think you've got another 20 pounds of muscle on you, like genuinely. So
I feel it in my bones. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, for real. Like I do. I think that it didn't make sense to go down to sort of 180, 175 for you. And just in terms of how quickly you came back up, it made a lot of sense. You need to be more like sitting at 200 and leaner. So I think you need another 20 pounds of actual muscle tissue, which you're only going to get by being in a small surplus for a long period of time. I mean, one of the advantages that I had when I was in my 20s was when everyone was trying to get lean, I was just being fat, eating a lot and lifting weights and getting jacked. So when I did finally diet down and I did my first show at 38, I was huge. You know, I competed at 175, which is big, you know? So yeah, I think you need long periods of time where you're bulking. And so ultimately that set point again, if you want to call it set point, settling point, whatever, you approach that with much more muscle and proportionately less fat. So I think far too many people are keen on getting the abs and they don't realize there's nothing else there. There's no shoulders, there's no traps, there's no chest. And also the amount of food they need to sustain that lower level of body weight and body fat is just not workable for everyday life. You should be able to sustain yourself on a reasonable amount of food, which means for large portions of the year, you need to be eating more food than is comfortable. That's, you know, that's interesting, right? So to be able to come back down and sustain yourself and maintain on a comfortable amount of food, you need to be uncomfortable for a long period of time. And that is what I think people aren't very good at doing. It's that delayed gratification thing all over again. So that's how ultimately you will look leaner just year round. I mean, if you can imagine an extra 20 pounds of muscle on you, just traps, delts, chest, massive.
20 pounds. People say 20 pounds like it's nothing. I'm like, 20 pounds of muscle? I would look insane if I gained 20 pounds.
Yeah, you'd be massive. Exactly. Imagine that, and imagine how you would look even with the same level of body fat you've got right now. The same amount of total fat you have right now, it would be, it would look completely different because you'd be just bigger all around. You'd be perfectly happy with that. That's what I feel like you need to do. So I think getting down into the uncomfortable levels of calories and body weight right now isn't necessary, because it's not your goal. Your goal is ultimately to be bigger and stronger and more muscular.
Yes.
That is the push. Spending too much time with calories that are way too low to gain isn't going to do much. Sure, every now and again, maybe twice a year, a 6-week cut, maybe a 10-week cut for the summer, 12-week cut for the summer, and a smaller cut in the winter is fine, just to give you more room to grow again. But ultimately, right now, where you're at now, the next 3 to 5 years needs to be growing to get you to where you want to be for the rest of your life. This is when you'll be able to hit my age and be like, okay, I've got enough muscle now. I'm cool. I'm going to do running and other stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. You just want to get to a spot where you're like, okay, I'm happy with this. I can maintain this. I can do other things while maintaining this, you know, and it's healthy to, like, as a natural lifter, you know, if you're not using drugs to get big, it's like your muscle's healthy, right? Like I can eat more food. I'm more protected. Like, it's not just vanity. It's not just aesthetics. Like being big and strong is awesome.
huge health benefits. You know, it's anti-diabetic because your muscles are a large pool for glycogen. I know this is a training podcast, so let's not go into all the health stuff again.
But here we go again.
But it's hugely healthy for you. Like, it's not just aesthetic at all. And I think we need to get away from that mindset. The general Joe public needs to understand just how healthy having muscle mass is naturally.
Absolutely, man. All right, buddy. Well, that's an hour and 15. Let's wrap this thing up. That was awesome. We got into some really good topics there. Cool, buddy. If you just want to let people know where they can find you, that'd be great.
Cool. So I'm on Faz Lifts, mostly on YouTube. That's my big platform now, and Instagram a little bit as well. I'm gonna also podcasts too. I'm trying to pump out the podcast a bit more as well. So, which are mostly just reposts of my YouTube. But thanks for inviting me on. It's always a pleasure. So I always like talking to you, and I like these chats. I'm actually glad we've got one on training this time, because it always devolves into health and diet, because I like talking about that, but I do really like talking about training, so I'm glad we had a podcast about that too.
Sounds good, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on.